Right. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, and good morning, everybody. Let me say very quickly that I'm deeply honored to be invited to this gathering. It's always a pleasure for me to address, and we emphasize, a non-partisan organization of whatever kind to discuss affairs which concern all of us. I've just subtitled this from the overall theme, Imperatives for a Sustainable Governance Legacy. The idea of thinking in terms of a sustainable legacy is well chosen. Sustainable is a crucial qualifier. The other part, the objective, is a choice, an ambition, a designated goal that primarily implicates future beneficiaries, or else an accidental byproduct of duty, commitment, and vision, which equally implicate the future and the humanity that inherits the physical attainments, or simply the laid out paths of the future. It is easy and tempting to embark upon flash-in-the-pan projects, winning easy plaudits, especially with an eye to the next elections, or perhaps even design and execute projects whose entire goal is to fill private pockets with trickle-down effects that earn sumptuous approval among a wider but still minority beneficiaries. That qualifier, sustainable, however, implies farsightedness and may even prove unpopular, both now and in the immediate future. I suspect, rightly or wrongly, that others will speak on material, tangible legacies loaded with statistics and measurements. That is as it should be. We do inhabit a physical world where even the currency of social exchange and relationships are primarily subject to measurable seizure of social exchange. My approach today is to enter a plea also for the intangible, the non-quantifiable. Speaking on the immaterial, for instance, would be legacies such as inculcating an ethical frame for ruler and citizen outlook, such as social discipline, which of course can make a leader a permanent reference point long after he or she has left office. This is sometimes achieved by personal example, but can also be extracted from a variety of undertakings that may or may not result in a material, palpable product, but whose process is manifestly such that even if the social conduct reverts to earlier negatives, let us say, for instance, a grasping, predatory, egotistical social attitude, a legacy of responsible, if there is a legacy of responsible and ethical options from the past, it would have been entrenched in society, and against it, future backsliding can be pilloried by a section of that same society, however minuscule. That a society turned wayward will be measured against a persistent, lurking yardstick of virtuous conduct, even in the midst of actual, of later degradation, is an indication of a sustainable legacy, usually implanted through leadership example. Let me quickly offer an ongoing testable example. You have only to operate or interact in any of the thousands of governmental or private institutions in the nation today. Before the end of the day, perhaps even within an hour, you're bound to hear one frustrated Nigerian or the other, in no matter what field of activity, sigh in nostalgic reference to one civic ethos that a former military duo implanted in public consciousness. That legacy being known as, I think it was called at the time, discipline, or else discipline. That such a nostalgic recollection is evoked today is an indication of a sustainable legacy, even where society has become disorderly, chaotic, virtually unscrambled, and seemingly impossible to piece together. Let me quickly add, so as not to be misunderstood and misrepresented, that I am not advocating thereby or recommending either member of that duo for the presidency, nor indeed for any public office. One must try and be objective, however, and acknowledge the truth wherever confronted by comparative states of civic being. Another example would be the creation of the National Youth Corps service in an effort to inculcate an ethical grounding based on a spirit of oneness among Nigerian youths. Even if Nigeria were to break up tomorrow, that is one bequest that has not only been proved right and in its sustainability as a legacy, but I'm convinced would be proven so even further by its retention in various forms in whatever enclaves emerge from the present fractious entity known as Nigeria. I shall have cause to refer to how society itself has measured up to its responsibilities towards the products of that institution in recent times, making parents across the state sometimes wonder why they ever subscribed to the notion of youthful preparation towards national cohesion, with a nation that is ready to offer up its young as incidental sacrifice to assuage adult bloodlust in time of political conflict. We're engaged, in short, here beyond material constructions, the creation of new industries, reduction of employment, or first-class junior World Cup team in any sport. We're not speaking of iron and steel industries, which no sooner resuscitated under one partnership disappear under weed and forest, only to be farmed out to new consortiums and without producing one steel ingot. We're speaking beyond rural electrification schemes, which suddenly brightens the existence of and multiply the productive potential of villages in hitherto unheard of directions, resuscitates moribund products that died with the departure of colonial district officers. We're looking beyond, or side by side with, the creation of mentally challenging institutions such as the Inventors Village, for instance, as obtains in India, which constantly renews itself through innovations, variations on, and adaptations of existing products, a constant refurbishment and transference of skills that led to India becoming a warehouse of replacement industry, spare parts, rudimentary and medium technologies from cottage industry, etc., for European branded products. All these, of course, more than qualify a sustainable legacy under visionary leadership, such as that of the Gandhis. They represent, however, the materialization of conceptual energy and dedication, the inculcation of a temperament whose adventurousness can be materialized even by others, but only if those others have imbibed the legacy of creative temperament and are driven by the same vision and adopt the same ethos of self-reliance. Leadership example comes even in standing up to the unseemly, the tyrannical, the corrupt, undemocratic, power-abusive conduct in critical. It's a critical, unquantifiable asset, as was exemplified, for instance, under a recent pseudo-democracy, where no more than a tiny handful of governors stood their ground against the megalomaniac onslaught of a supposedly democratically elected president, a primus inter pares, in a federal government structure, until only one, just one, was left standing, while the Constitution was gang-raped, the Supreme Court's decisions openly flouted and derided. A sustainable legacy of resistance remains long after such resolute leaders have left office, a tradition, no less. They leave office having laid out by example the onus of political responsibility on their citizens and colleagues. That history is repeating itself, alas, even as we're gathered here, with variations, of course, but just as sinister and ominous. Now, none of the foregoing reduces the value of material translation of ideas. Ideas begin in the process, however, and the enabling of ideas, be it through education or personal example, is what remains even after the material product itself has been established or has degenerated. The quality of life, yes, even those sometimes unquantifiable differences are primary indices of any sustainable legacy. And one aspect of the quality of citizen life, we come to this inevitably, one aspect, an overriding concern is the opening up of political space. I will not go deeply into that, as I found that the setting I was expecting is very different from what I've encountered, and this actually is more a discussion than a lecture, so we can, when discussion begins, talk about maybe the opening of political space, especially by politicians who find themselves beneficiaries of the existing political order, but close the space, the access to that space, through a very ego-centered approach to governance. There was, talking about opening up political space, there was a famous British wit in the Victorian era who once arrived home with no luggage, not even a piece of carry-on luggage, just his walking stick. The customs officer asked him the usual question, "Oga, you get something for us?" "No, sorry, I have become conditioned by the welcome formula to absolute strangers, as it obtains in certain other places that shall be nameless. So let me quickly retract that libel." What the customs officer actually said was no more than, "Have you anything to declare?" You know the story. Well, that gentleman's response was, "Nothing but my genius." If that had been elsewhere, he would have been denied entry, never mind his being a citizen, carrying his national passport. A customs officer would have consulted his computer under the counter to check his name against the list of subversives, alerted his superiors, and had him placed under watch from entry point. In the unlikely event that became satisfied that it was just a quip, he would then make sure that he's placed under watch, at least from that moment on and throughout his return home. Now, Nigerians will be hardly foolhardy enough to imitate Oscar Wilde, but the very fact of answering what we've learned to recognize as the home call to put an end to brain drain comes to the same thing. By the very gesture of coming back, answering that call, that citizen is actually saying, yes, I have some genius, quote unquote, to contribute to the intellectual recovery, productive recovery of the nation. So I'm reporting for duty, declaring no possession but genius. And what will be the fate of that individual? Well, we know from example, many after a few weeks turned tail, cut their losses, returned to continue their lives as tolerated aliens, an uncongenial, undignified condition, but one that at least guaranteed professional satisfaction elsewhere. Now, imagine if that border point of entry is actually internal. Our bodyguards, especially politicians, are the constitutionally entrenched and empowered donors of political and productive space. They hold the key to admission, rejection, and even sometimes ejection. And what are the ultimate parameters they set for admission to that space? Let's not even begin to consider it. Very often, it requires inducement, requires groveling, whereas all that is needed is a clean bill of health, tax compliance from the police, etc., clean bill of health from the police, I beg your pardon, verifiable means of living, and allied non-monetary possessions. No extraordinary genius is even claimed, just a resolve to serve, to make a difference, to join in turning desert and swampland into pride of habitat, etc., etc. What they need is just their mind, their quote-unquote genius, not material possessions. And this is the simplest, the modest sum of visionary and selfless leadership, not only administering along mundane parameters, but opening up political and social space. Other nations have demonstrated what can be done with virtually nothing. Check out Rwanda as a lesson in heroic and imaginative recovery. Assets, albeit tragically diminished, nothing but the human asset. Open wide the political and social space. That is one of the most critical legacies that governance can leave. Kwame Nkrumah was close to the mark when he urged, "Seek ye first the political kingdom, and all other things shall follow." What confronts us today is the problematic of the search for that political kingdom, the active space for the exercise of creative political power. However, even the pursuit of that active space, its methodology must not be underestimated. It can demean, it can contribute to human dignity. Contest is part of the mechanics of the human desire to excel. That methodology, however, can be a killing legacy on the one hand. It can even be pursued, however, in festal accents, as I believe it was Governor Fashola who once urged, like a full-blown festival. A political contest can become, no, in fact, it is a tool of education for the younger generation. Such youth are enabled to extract from the right kind of political conduct a foundation for the cultivation of civilized existence, a sense of fair play, thus the ability to absorb defeat while preparing for the next bout of rivalry, transferring the inherent virtues to an ethical pursuit in all other fields of human productivity. Political morality is a human asset that is applicable to every human undertaking without exception. And we know that imagination in political practice engenders and enhances productivity. So there's absolutely nothing to lose through an imaginative contest based on fair terms, at least if one seriously considers the future, that is youth, as the pillar on which nations are built. To them belong the fruits of such a nurturing legacy, politics as an open university in which ethics prevail even under stress and character is formed. On the other hand, and here we encounter the negative legacy of the past, politics can be pursued as a killing machine. Once the culture of killing as a viable means of contest is implanted, then, just like the imagination, it becomes applicable in other projects. That is why only too sadly predictable. We're living right within a political kingdom that is remote from what Kwame Nkrumah advocated. We're living in an animal kingdom. But just consider for a moment its antithesis. A nurturing field, a prime, sustainable legacy that any political leader can leave behind, or else let us simply revert to the politics of survival, not even of the fittest, but of the deadliest. Once, it was sufficient to prepare oneself against rampaging armed robbery. Now, the casual wayfarer has to confront a now proliferating menace, kidnapping, on the roads, in homes, in places of worship, and most recently, even student hostel. The menace is ever present. Human sensibility toward horrors and daily degradation is blunted. The nation is becoming inured to a daily routine of brutish existence where the once unthinkable, The unacceptable has become the norm. Do I state the obvious? Do I state what is common knowledge? Oh, no to either. I merely restate and restate them. Our humanity drains away in trickles. These trickles turn to rivulets, slipstreams, and finally in torrents that inundate the best and the strongest. This is what makes it possible for infants to be snatched even during the conduct of worship and held for ransom. This is what makes it possible when a killing rampage follows disputed elections, taking the lives of our own offspring, the immediate beneficiaries, the sustainers of these very legacies we have taken off to address here. Yes, indeed. When products of a proud legacy, a clearly sustainable one, such as the National Youth Corps, are co-opted into an electoral exercise, identifiable by their uniforms, they are yet hunted down, then disposed of mostly in a brutish, ghoulish manner. Some mutilated, in some cases, followed by phone calls on the mobile phones of the victims to their parents, gleefully informing the bereaved of the fate of their children. Yes, these things happened. But the most unconscionable aspect was reserved for the aftermath, the overt endorsement of the butchery of youth and its absolution. When some of us cried out circumstances, what was the response? These would-be paracletes of change, the promoters of a caring transformation in political conduct, countered without the slightest embarrassment, that is mere sentimentality. Adding, in the cozy security of their homes, no life is more important than another, and allied presumed profundities. No life is more important than another. As if the contrary of that tranquilizing cliché was ever proposed by anyone in the first place, or has become the equivalent of an outright condemnation of homicide. That is when political ethos seeks safety among wolves, where the law of the jungle prevails. There, indeed, among the predators, no life is more important than the next. It's all food. That should be the defense of those youths who seriously abducted young girls like Cynthia, drugged, robbed, raped, and murdered them. This is a befitting motto for Boko Haram. Was the equality or otherwise of life ever the issue in such instances? Nothing from those voices about the responsibility of society to its youth, especially when those youths are sent into battle zones armed with nothing but their genius, as yet unactualized, but equal in deserving to those scornful commentators. One of them, a former minister. The sitting governor within the same abattoir delivered that very smug, self-exculpating banality, thereby absolving himself from failure to protect those sent to serve in his constituency. Later he found himself under fire, felt obliged to qualify, retract, and begin narration of his positive record. Not so. The ex-minister, who continues to declare, and in other words, anything goes in love and politics. A Pavlovian response to perceived injustice is one thing, especially if occupied with frustration, political frustration. But to go on and repeat this perverted gospel, perverted because superficially true, but put to diabolical usage in media interviews, capping it in his recent memoirs by libeling such protesters, victims, not merely of a mushy sentimentality, but ethnic affliction, this is personal subjectivism with inhuman ramifications. No life is more important than others. Is that truism universally applicable for all time, for all occasions, and in no matter what context? Is that a viable election manifesto? No wonder they say the devil knows only too well how to quote the Bible or the Quran for its own purposes. I waited fruitlessly, it now appears, for the same magisterial pronouncement to be uttered by the pundits of life valuation when 42 students were slaughtered in their beds in an institution where they sought to develop and actualize their genius. I've been waiting, futilely it seems, for those same voices to tell the nation and the horrified world to shut up, to banish their sentimentality over the massacre of mere students, to remind them that no life is more important than another. After all, hundreds, thousands of other Nigerians have been killed since the Boko Haram insurgency began, bombed out in markets, motor parks, etc., butchered in their beds, churches, mosques. So why the excess force? A mere 42 students. I long to be instructed by the sages of our time. Yes, by all means, let us speak of legacies. And let us indeed work towards the materialization of productive vision. At the basis of our projections, however, must be a clarity of destination and proceeding, understanding that the future is demeaned, degraded, when, as fortunate survivors, all of us, we diminish the value of the agents of the future. That is not sentiment. To carry into the future the viral spores of the present, that is one legacy for which we shall receive no thanks, only curses and imprecations from those who follow. Let us therefore attempt to adopt the obverse, a humanistic ethos as base, the core of all endeavor. We must account it the one legacy that animates other legacies, that informs methodology of governance, projects, and the material product of policies, whether conceived as an agenda for the poor, the enhancement of environment, an educational initiative, or a health design, quite simply a restored humanistic ethos. To adapt Kwame Nkrumah's dictum once more for this tortured time and space that we inhabit, seek ye first the ethical legacy, and all other things shall follow. Thank you very much.